Hello, friends, and welcome to Kairos Time, a time when we enter into a space open to the eternal voice of God. And I invite you to enter this time with me by joining in a word of prayer. Let us pray. Still speaking God, we pray that we will hear your voice speak among the many voices around us. And if it's your will, you will use these words I'm about to share, and you will use the meditations of all of our hearts and speak to us of those things that are truly from you. Amen. My goodness, what a week we have just lived through and are living through. The situations going on in Washington, D.C. are actually not divorced from things that have been going on in our country for an awfully long time, manifesting in different ways at different times. And so, as we always do as Christians, we keep going back to the scriptures to listen for God's wisdom as we also look at and hold the reality of our world. We hold the newspaper in one hand and the gospel in another. And today our gospel reading comes from the writings of St. Mark, and it is very early on in the story. It's chapter 1, verses 4 through 11, and it's Mark's version of Jesus's baptism. As we look at that story this week, we're going to look at it in a slightly different way because the things happening in our world are asking us to think about some very important things. And especially this week, my focus keeps coming back to a phrase that you might not have heard very often, if at all. It's one that I was introduced to when I was preparing for the ordained ministry, and it's this phrase: fiduciary trust. Fiduciary trust. There's many different kinds of trust that we can engage in. Experiential trust, romantic trust, faith trust, but fiduciary trust is a very special kind of trust. A fiduciary form of trust is one that has been somehow civically endorsed. People who are in positions of authority have to go through some kind of vetting position to be awarded by a community of responsibility the status of a person with fiduciary trust. I'll give you some modern examples. When a person wants to become a psychotherapist, one receives medical training. There's also, just like with all other medical professions, there are residencies. There's different forms of evaluation. Tests have to be passed. Mentors and other evaluators screen the person for their capacity, not only to provide care, but very importantly, to do so engaging in fiduciary trust, a trust that puts the well-being of the person being served over the well-being of the person who's providing the service. We place fiduciary trusts in healthcare providers, in attorneys, in school teachers, in pastors, in bankers. We put fiduciary trust in people who we are asking to do things for us in a trustworthy way. Now, we do so through vetting them in different processes. We do so with our elected officials too. We put fiduciary trust in them. We say we trust you to make decisions that are good for us. Everybody understands that relationship, right? Fiduciary trust, though, the way I understand it, is extra special because it's not just me personally deciding to trust somebody, but it's some kind of a process where we as a people go through and say, I think this person has some special skills and abilities to do things that will help all of us. As a pastor who has served in the Church of Jesus Christ for decades now, I can tell you there are times when we fail to maintain the bonds of fiducial trust. There are times when lay leaders or pastors in a congregation will do things that are not good for us. They put themselves first. And when they put themselves first, it breaks that fiduciary trust. And not only does it rattle our sense of justice, of safety, I think it rattles our sense of, is the world a safe place? Now, some populations within our country have experienced a breach of fiduciary trust for a long time. They found that organizations that have had, say, vetted police, and we're seeing too with the vaccines, people saying, I find it very hard to believe that some of the decisions public health is making really are beneficial to our people. So fiduciary trust is something, it's about relationship that always has to be worked on. Why am I beginning a sermon with a little lecture on fiduciary trust? And I'm not just thinking about what happened in Washington this past week. I want to take us back in time 2,000 years ago. When Jesus was born, when his cousin John was born, they lived in a nation that was a religious monarchy. There was no separation of church and state. The king of the nation and the high priest of the Sanhedrin were people who not only had a great deal of civil power, they were anointed with sacred power. They were seen as representatives of God's will on earth. And so their authority was vast and in some places complete. Now you got to add to that the extra layer that when Jesus was born, his homeland was under the control of another empire, the Roman Empire. And so in addition to the king and to the high priest, there was another layer of authority, and that came from Rome. And so we had the Caesar's representatives who were there, Pontius Pilate, those folks. Now, most of the people, I think, in Jesus' homeland did not trust the Roman Empire, did not give them fiduciary trust, did not anticipate that the desire of the Roman Empire was going to match the needs of the Hebrew people. They just kind of knew the Roman Empire had a different agenda. But they had put their trust in their king, they had put their trust in their high priests, and yet what had happened again and again is that oftentimes they had been colluded with power with the Roman Empire, and they had made decisions that were beneficial to themselves and their families or their power group, but it didn't benefit the people, God's people, the Hebrew people in the nation of Israel. So all that's going on when two women get pregnant. We told the story a couple of weeks ago. The first one is a woman named Elizabeth. She's married to Zacharias. Elizabeth is a descendant of the great Aaron, one of the three important siblings who led the people out of slavery out of Egypt. The eldest brother we hear a lot about, Moses, but there was another sibling, a brother named Aaron, and another sibling named Marion. And so it was Moses, Aaron, and Marion who led the Hebrew people through the wilderness. Aaron would go on to be the inheritor of the religious practices of the nation. And so that this is the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Elizabeth. She is a direct descendant from Aaron, the priestly liberator of the Hebrew people. A very important point of status. Now, Aaron's descendants went on to create what was known as the tribe of Aaron. And it was decreed in Hebrew law that only people from the tribe of Aaron could serve as priests in the temple there in Jerusalem. So a fellow named Zacharias, he had relatives who were descendants of the tribe of Aaron, and he was a temple priest, and he married Elizabeth. And these two grew in service. They served God through their religious structures, and they prayed and prayed for a child. And finally, when they were both really old, they had a baby, and that's John the Baptist. John was the inheritor of both the ancestral lineage of the great Aaron, one of the liberators of Egypt, but also he was a descendant from the tribe of Aaron, and through his father, who was one of the temple priests, he too was being prepared to become a temple priest. Aaron is the child of the sacred leadership of the nation of Israel. His cousin, Jesus, his father, whom we know as Joseph, was a descendant of the monarchy, of the sacred monarchy of the people of the Hebrew people of King David. Jesus' father was a descendant of King David. He has lineage to the royal monarchy. His mother, who's related to Elizabeth, she also had to have been related to the tribe of Aaron. So Jesus's parents represent, again, both the sacred authority within the nation of Israel and the political, the monarchy, okay? By all rights, these two young men had every expectations that their lives would be engaged in service to the larger community. They came out of families that understood who they were identity-wise, even though their country was under a time of imperial rule. So, I've been thinking about this a lot this past week. These two young men, John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth, by all rights, if they wanted to reintroduce God's living message to a theocracy, a nation that was built with God as the ruler, I was thinking about the fact, why didn't they begin their ministries in Jerusalem? Why didn't the whole thing get started in Jerusalem at the feet of the Sanhedrin, the religious leadership, at the temple, or at the palace of King Herod? Instead, where does God call John the Baptist to begin his ministry? He calls John the Baptist out of the temple. He calls John the Baptist out of the Sanhedrin, out of the places of institutional authorized authority. Because, friends, they're not trustworthy institutions. God calls John to the River Jordan. Now, to understand the River Jordan, this is not just a body of water. Okay, this is not just, we have rivers too. We have a nice Sacramento River. That's a beautiful river, but that's not what the River Jordan is. The River Jordan would be a lot more like the Rio Grande here in North America. A body of water which is a line of demarcation, not just between nations, but I would say ideologically between ideas about how to be human. For John the Baptist to be called to begin his ministry on the borderlands at the Jordan River is to be called to the edge. To be called to the edge of the boundary of the nation of Israel, and to be called to the edge of the wilderness, of the place that wasn't part of God's sovereignty according to Hebrew lore. It's there on that edge, in between those places, and then that amazing in-between place, the place that their ancestors crossed over when they left Egypt and came into the promised land. It is there, in that wild, non-institutional place, that John the Baptist begins his ministry. And he does so by offering ritual that would have been known to people who would go to Jerusalem. Because there's a long history within the Jewish tradition of going to holy waters and bathing, to be healed, to be cleansed of sin. This was one of the repertoire of Hebrew rituals. But John the Baptist hears God calling to practice that ritual in the River Jordan, in this kind of dangerous place, not this institutionally safe, protected, and regulated place, but in this wild place. So John goes down to the waters of the Jordan River. And again, he's being prompted by God. He is a mystic. He is a prophet. He knows he is not doing what his daddy had taught him to do, but he's reinterpreting the rituals, and he is inviting people not to come to the temple where they have to pay temple tax, not to go out and buy things that they maybe can't afford to offer for a priest to give to a sacrifice to God in a room that mere mortals can't enter. John offers a democracy of salvation, and he invites anyone who wishes to come to this wild place and to receive in the intimacy of their own hearts a liberation. He invites them to step into these wild waters, wild meaning not institutionalized, to release to God that which needs to be released, that they might be reborn, renovated, repaired, restored. So here's John doing this amazing spiritual work that is totally outside of the script of authorized religion. And he knows he's doing this because he believes that God really is going to send the Messiah, and he wants to get everybody ready for the Messiah. And then Jesus shows up on the banks of the Jordan. And in other tellings of the story, I think it's from the Gospel in St. Luke, John says, "I'm not worthy to untie your sandals." John gets pretty anxious because he thinks, no, I'm here to get people ready for you. I'm not here to do a ritual on you. I'm here to get people ready. But Jesus is insistent. He knows that he needs to step into those wild waters. He needs to step into that place that is not the temple, that is not the palace, to step into the waters his ancestors crossed through when they were going through great transition, trying to be more fully aligned to God's dream, that Jesus too has to step into those waters. And furthermore, he humbles himself to John the Baptist. This week, I think what Jesus was doing was saying, I'm placing my fiduciary trust in the prophetic, mystical tradition of Judaism. Jesus didn't go to the temple. Jesus didn't go to the palace to be authorized and anointed. Jesus went into the waters of the Jordan, into a wild place, and he invited the son of a temple priest, a descendant of the great Aaron, to baptize him. He placed trust in John to perform a ritual. And when this ritual is performed, when Jesus has located his spiritual trust in this radical, prophetic, revolutionary movement, it is in that moment what happens? The heavens break open. And some people say that what happened, it looked like some kind of a dove coming out of the sky. And other people said very clearly it was a voice. It was the voice of God saying, "You are my son, the beloved. In you I am well pleased." I think God was saying, I am pleased that you understand that I don't live in a specific building. I don't have a specific zip code. I dwell in the places of integrity, of spiritual integrity, of moral integrity. When Jesus located fiduciary trust in John the Baptist to baptize him, Jesus was realigning where we are to place our fiduciary trust. We are to place our trust in those people who are moral, those people who attend to God's words, even though they surprise and take us to places we didn't expect to go. No wonder God was pleased. Jesus did not give sway, the mortal part of Jesus did not give sway to the pomp and circumstance of the houses of authority. Jesus gave sway to the impulse of integrity. That's why we put our fiduciary trust in him, and we put our fiduciary trust in those people who represent that kind of personality, that kind of value system, that kind of courageous appreciation of God breaking through. It can be very frightening to put fiduciary trust in people who color outside the lines, because John the Baptist certainly wasn't doing things the way his dad did. Jesus certainly wasn't doing things the way people thought other messiahs, the way they had envisioned the Messiah working. But again and again, Jesus starts putting his orientation not toward his own well-being. He keeps putting his trust in the people. He goes to be with them wherever they are, no matter who they are, no matter what's going on in their lives. Jesus puts an orientation in his ministry to the people, not to the institutions. And it is as he cares for those people that he understands more and more fully the message that he has been brought to earth to deliver. It's not just a message of individual transformation. It is a message of collective belovedness of all beings, and of both faith and civil structures needing to be in service of the most vulnerable. Jesus gives us a set of value systems that will literally help to give birth to things like the notion of a democracy, because Jesus teaches us the value of each person, not just as an individual, but to notice that we are a people, and that those with whom we place fiduciary trust should put first and foremost the well-being of the people. Not some of the people that they like, not the people who will give them the things they want to get, not the people who look like them, not necessarily the people who will bow down to them, but the people who will put the well-being of all the people first. As we begin this new year and roll a week or two into this new year, let us take heart in the bold example of John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth in placing our fiduciary trust in those people who truly embody the Spirit of God, who seek the well-being of all beings, especially those who are most vulnerable. Dear ones, I don't know for sure if this is exactly the message God wanted me to share with you today. I have tried to humble myself and listen, so I pray that you will do so too. Will you keep listening to the still speaking God? Keep listening for wisdom and guidance, for hope, and let us all be careful about where we place our trust. May we authorize those for service to the larger good who truly have in mind the well-being of the larger good. May God bless you and keep you. I love you, and so does God.